Hello, welcome to Continuing the Conversation with Defeat the Label and the Meemic Foundation, the show that looks at the why behind anti-bullying work and those who make it their mission, and how to further the work and continue this incredibly important conversation. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my partners in this podcast, Pam Harlan, the Executive Director of the Meemic Foundation, and my colleague, Christine LaBelle from Defeat the Label. This podcast would not happen without their support and dedication. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Kevin Epling, parent advocate. We're so excited to have you with us for this important conversation. After Kevin has shared his story, we'll be sharing some information about upcoming episodes, the show, and where to follow us. So make sure you listen all the way through. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce parent advocate extraordinaire, Kevin Epling, to the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Christine. Thank you, Pam. I think this is a great step, forward for Defeat the Label and Meemic and putting together a podcast. And I'm happy and honored to be one of the first people on it. And I know as you kind of move this forward, you're going to have a lot of really good guests with a lot of information, that people can use and carry the conversation forward, which we're all about. When we started doing these conversations, that was a special thing. For those of you who don't know my background and how I got into this, very briefly, in 2002, my son was a victim of bullying, and roughly about 40 days later, he took his own life. So that, aside from turning our world upside down, it really sent me on a different mission as to the why these things happen, and not just within families, but within communities, within our schools, and what had been done prior to, and what did we need to do. And I think for a parent, this is one of the most horrendous things that you can go through. And unfortunately, I've met far too many parents here in Michigan, across the United States, who have also lost children to bullying. So that is why this is so important through all of our different avenues to have in-person conferences with Defeat the Label and Meemic, and now moving virtually to a podcast so that people can reach out and ask for assistance, ask for help. But more importantly, we bring more people into the fold to make a difference, because when we talk about bullying prevention, it's really about rebuilding culture, and it's really about building community within the school and within the greater community about what are we going to do about it. So I started talking about Matt's story actually about 2 months after Matt passed away in 2002, then started doing it largely in 2003 up until working with the legislature in 2005 to get a law passed in 2011, then getting it re-updated in 2014, I think it was. So there's been a lot of work, but I haven't done it alone. There are people like you that on this podcast, and those who are listening to this podcast, who really are the driving force to keep it going. And that's why I want to be here with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Kevin. For people who have not attended the community conversation on bullying, either in person or virtually over the last few years, you have been our moderator extraordinaire, taking over the mic and introducing and controlling the conversation, and also helping to steer it, to make things actionable, and to give people really firm takeaways to what they can do to move this mission forward. Could you share some of what made you decide to take your personal story and turn it into this legislation, and how you ended up saying this needs to be an actionable moment?
Yeah, I think the easiest way I put this for other parents, and I say it all the time, is I got drafted, into this. I had no idea that bullying was the issue that it was at the time of Matt's passing. and what it is today. And I think I was very lucky at that time to be working at Michigan State, and then also having the resources of working with people in psychology, psychiatry, communications, and also criminal justice, who were looking at things from a very different perspective. And that's what pulled me in. That at that time, and I think even today, we have parents who really don't understand what bullying is and the effects of what happens to those individuals who are the targets, of bullying. So I think that's where I got involved to make a difference. And for me, as a parent, if I could save a parent going through what we went through, if we could save a life somewhere down the line, was the overarching goal. And when I was asked to come on board to talk about legislation, then that was just another tool, because I think that's one of the things that the conversations with DTL and Meemic that we've had in person and online throughout the pandemic, which quality, thanks to all of you, Jamie and Christine and Pam, of keeping those sessions going during the pandemic to still give people information. I think that has been so helpful to people, because it's like, we're going to give you homework, and hopefully, you take that and you apply it, parts of it, to what really works for you. Not everything works. And I think that's the issue that also schools have to look at, is not every program is going to work for them. They have to find what will work within their parameters that fits their time, their monetary commitments, and, what involved the students. And if you have a program and you're not involving your students, to me, there's a big problem there, and that needs to be looked at.
If I can jump in and ask a quick question, this is going to be
Sure.
pretty basic, but exactly what is Matt's law?
So Mass law is a requirement that every school needs to have an anti-bullying policy. It was pretty hard to think that having a bullying prevention policy was merely a suggestion for our schools, until we got involved and had this law passed that every school must have a policy in place. There are 5 bullet points within Matt's law that the schools must follow. Then there are other items that schools are encouraged to do. Some of those are, you have to have a timeline for reporting. When you change the policy, you need to inform the public. Then it is also, you're encouraged to start some form of bullying prevention within those schools. It took us several rewrites to get cyberbullying in, because a lot of people thought cyberbullying was not an issue. And that was one of the first things I put in 2005, and it was taken out every year until 2010, when we had to go back and add it in. And we saw what was happening overseas with early texting before it ever got to the United States. It's there. Cyberbullying is there now, but it is a guideline of what schools are supposed to be doing, and doing annual reports and handing those annual reports from the superintendent to the school board. So my first advice for parents whose child may be going through something at a school is to get the school's bullying prevention policy or guidelines, and also download the state law and look at them and correlate them and see if they're doing what they are supposed to be doing. And if they're not, that's when the parent really needs to become that little 4-year-old and go in and ask why, and keep asking why until you get a definite answer.
One question that I get asked a lot, and I would rather turn this over to you since you're the expert, is, are schools participating? Are schools doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they need to be doing? I know you're in contact with a lot of parents. I think that when you Google bullying in Michigan, you are one of the first, items that pop up is your name and your information. Are schools following the requirements? Are schools doing what needs to be done? And do you think that there's more that they should be doing? And what do parents do if they're not? Sorry, that's like 4 different questions all at once.
Yeah, but it's the number one loaded question about it, is because our schools doing it. I think there are schools that are really on top of it, and they are really doing a good job of following it and making sure that their district is following it, which is really important too. Within a district, you can't have 3 schools following it and other 2 schools not doing anything. So I think there are schools who are really following it. I do think there are schools who are just ignoring it flat out. And I think there are schools that are trying, they are trying. But we started this, this is 20 years, since Matt passed away. We've all been talking about this. Dr. Phil just had a show on Monday, and that was the first thing he said. We're talking about this again. This is one of our first shows we did when we came on the air. So we are still talking about this issue. And I think I've said it in many presentations. For me, for what I've learned over the years, bullying is not a student problem. It is an adult problem, because it is the adults who aren't carrying through on, those reports. They're not carrying through on the timelines of investigating incidents. They're not carrying through with when parents have a complaint. Instead of kind of ushering them out the door, they really listen to that parent, because the facts will belie that if a parent is complaining to you, there are about 5 other parents that probably are not complaining to you that have the same situation. So I think it's a really loaded question. Schools will probably say they are doing everything that they can, but we all need to do more. This is an issue that is never going to go away. It is an issue that leads to so many other factors. It can lead to depression. It can lead to drug use. It can lead all the way to what we see, unfortunately, is violence in our schools, and gun violence and random shootings. We've seen this. It's been documented. And I think where we're heading into a phase now of everybody wants to fortify the schools and bar the windows, and put in armed guards. But we can't lose sight that somewhere in that school, there are students who are targets of bullying that could lead them down that path. So it's all intermingled. There's not an either or. And I think some people want to do just this or that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of schools today say, we did bullying. We did it 2-3 years ago. We had somebody come in and talk about it. We're all good. We're good. And this is a never ending cycle of education, re-education, and implementation that we all have to really keep an eye on.
It does make you wonder, though, too, is that because it's very interesting that, and not to put words in your mouth, Kevin, but like there's a gold standard of what schools are doing that, like, I salute you. You're doing everything that we would want you to do. And then there's the schools that are, I'll just do the bare minimum to get by. And I guess the deeper dive, and I don't know if there's even an answer to this, but I guess but it causes me to want to ask the question, why is the gap? Why is there that gap?
I think it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer of why is that gap. Because for myself, who has spoke to schools, has spoken at conferences, and I know we get a lot of young gung-ho teachers, and they're great and they want to make an impact in their school. Are they hitting roadblocks at the administration level? Are they hitting roadblocks because of funding? Are they hitting roadblocks because somewhere someone doesn't think it's needed? And unfortunately, do some of those people run out of steam? Because this is an issue. If you're a teacher and you really want to make a difference, you have to have an advocate. You have to have someone in that school who is going to support you and help you move through the ladder and maybe move up. And my thought was always, if we train the teachers earlier and those teachers move up the ladder and they become administrators, they're going to be being able to apply all these things that they've learned. But even as an administrator, you get to a certain point you can't do any more than what someone allows you to do. So it's another really tough question. And I do think, again, there are schools and administrators that are really on the ball. And, that's where, people like Meemic and Defeat the Label can do a great job of finding those and highlighting, like you said, and shine the spotlight on those for other school districts to look at, so we can say this worked, but this did not work for us. It may work for you. And be collaborative. I don't think there's anything I've ever found where someone says you absolutely cannot do this. And we have to listen to new ideas. And I think some of the ideas come from the students themselves. The students know what is happening within the school. As administrators, teachers, we need to listen to the students, but we also have to give students the credence to talk about it, that they're not going to be the snitch, that they're not going to be next, that this is a issue of safety for everyone involved. And when you open that door, students will step through it. And I've also said a long time, if I only had to deal with adults, I'd be out of this. I would have stopped doing this a long time ago. It's the kids, it's the students who keep me energized in this and talking about it, because I know when they're thinking about it, they're thinking about how they can do things better and not going out of the way to hurt and cause pain or consequence to a fellow student.
When you were, it's funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking about you talking to students, and I've been so lucky to have the opportunity to see your in-school presentations to students. And having had been a student and also being somebody who works with students, watching them listen to you was fascinating, because you are such a captivating presenter, and they love hearing from you. And I'm going to ask you a question about that in a moment. But the first question I did want to ask you was, you know, it was such a journey that you and your family went on, from losing Matt and turning that into Matt's Law. Looking back, if it was to be happening today, what would you change? What do you think you'd do differently? What might you ask differently in the law? What do you think, is there anything different? Are we in a different place now than we were in the initial work?
Well, I think from the very get-go, there are things that I would have put in the law that were, people would have called them punitive, but they would have been measures that the school could not wiggle out of. Things would have been mandated from the very beginning, and tried to have found funding, to help. But I think a lot of schools are kind of misgiven that they have to have a lot of money. There are schools that are doing fantastic things with little to no money. So money helps. It allows you to interject or engage with those students and other teachers. It helps. But that's one thing I think, not knowing the process and trying to learn the legislative process, and going through it, and that old adage, you never want to two things you never want to see being made in your life is sausage and laws. That's 100% true. And I definitely would have been more vocal about putting mandates in there. I tried as much as I could, but I think that is one thing I probably would have tried to stick to my guns a little bit more. But I was trying to be more of a politician, and I gave that up to just get something in place that I thought would help across the board. And I think I had a lot of both sides angry at me going through the process, because I wanted to have something that would have an effect, that required schools to at least do something and would help protect our kids. And I think that's what we came up with. But it's not as solid as it should be, and I'm the first person to admit that. That's why we've always looked at going back and adding to it. And I think it should be a living document. It shouldn't just be you do it once and you walk away from it.
when you were since Matt's Law has taken place, since you've been sharing your story, what feedback do you get from teachers, from parents, from educators who hear your story?
I think a lot of teachers, they see it. They know that it's happening. A lot of them are thankful that I am telling this story, that that I'm honest about it. And I think the other thing I try not to be is I don't try to overplay what it is. It is what happened to me. And there are people out there, I mean, they want to go into a presentation and make people cry. I don't want to make people cry. I want them to do something with me. I want them to be engaged and activated, you know. So I do things a little bit differently in trying to engage, and there's humor. It's in a lot of my presentations, you know, Matt's 2 minutes, 3 minutes out of a 50-minute presentation. It's all about everything that surrounds it. So I think teachers are they're happy that someone is talking about this. You know, and I've gotten nice emails, you know, from teachers who have said, you know, this is going to help me do my job. You know, we saved a life because, you know, someone came after one of your presentations and told us what was going on. So it does make a difference out there, and but it's not just me. It's all of us working together. It's the community, you know. It's I'm a visitor when I get to go to those schools, but then there's times I think sometimes I can break through that they can't, because they've all just been doing it over and over again. So it's it takes a lot, but there's a lot we get out of it.
I think, and I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation, but I do want to say this. I always find you so quotable in general. You always say something that I'm like, oh, I should write that down. That's really good. And one thing that you said was, everybody always says they're doing what they can, but we all need to be doing more. What do we need to be doing? We as parents, we as advocates, the students that you come across, if you were to give them steps, what should we be doing?
The biggest step is what I do tell parents, like I said before, is get the policy, look at the policy, what the school says they're doing, look at the law, cross-reference those, and go back and ask those questions. The biggest piece of advice I do give parents is, even though this is a highly stressful situation, I had to learn this myself the hard way. It's a stressful situation, it's an emotional situation, is to be calm about it. Be as calm as you can, and it's very difficult, and ask really good, tough questions that deserve answers about what the school is doing. On top of that, if you are a parent and your child is going through things, sometimes you may want to reach out to other parents, because you may find out that there are multiple students who are going through the same problem, sometimes with the same student. And I think for schools, it's not about punishment of the person who is harming other people. They need help too, you know. So we also have to think about those who are harming others, and why are they doing it, and do they need our help, which they do, and how are we going to facilitate that? So it's not just all about punishment. People think, you know, it's the old school of, well, you know, we used to go out and we used to punch each other behind the school and it'd all be over with. And, you know, today it's not that way. Today it is more of a mental mind game that students play against each other, and also through technology. Even through the pandemic, you know, cyberbullying, you know, is still there, still alive. In some ways it has gone up, other ways it's come down, but it is still there, and schools were still having to deal with that throughout the pandemic. So that's another thing for parents, is to be very aware of what technology that your child is using, and don't be afraid to kind of talk about those issues. You know, talk with your students about what they're going through, or if they're experiencing anything, who can help. They may not want a parent to get involved, but then for students, they need to have someone in that school who is a confidential person that they can go and kind of talk to. Every school should kind of be able to set something up like that for the students.
May I interject with a question here?
Absolutely.
I'm really happy that you brought up the aspect of electronics and cyberbullying, which bullying in and of itself has been an issue that has been around forever.
Mhm.
But the face of bullying has evolved so much with the introduction of online access with these kids. And I've heard it brought up a number of times by parents and by some schools as well. And when the parents are looking to the schools to become involved and try to provide a resolution or take some action when a bullying situation is going on, once the school finds out that a lot of this activity is actually taking place virtually and online, there's a hesitancy because they say, well, we can only act if there's obvious actions going on or obvious bullying going on at the school within school hours. And the parents are saying, well, the only place that my child has contact with this other person is at school, which is why I'm reaching out to you. And the schools are sort of trying to take a step back and saying, well, if it's going on online, that's out of the school's, I guess, realm of authority. And what are you finding with that? How does a parent in that situation approach the school if that's the school's response?
Yeah, and sadly, that is the school's response. And I think that even goes back to when we were, I kept putting the cyberbullying in, and I kept writing anytime, any place. Regardless of where it happens, the school has a responsibility because it's influencing and impacting that child's ability to learn, which is, one of the foremost things of a school. That child should have the safety and ability to learn, no matter where it is. And that's why even in the law, like the bus stops are covered because school buses are an extension of the school. And that was one of the first things also. They were like, well, if it happens on the school bus, it's not happening on school grounds. Nope, school buses, that's property of the schools, that's school grounds. That has to be covered. I think with the last version, when I put in cyberbullying, my any place, anytime was changed to if students are using school-owned equipment. So they made a loophole for themselves. So I think for parents, when you are confronted with your child receiving emails, being a target on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, any of those things, anything that comes through that is inflammatory of your child or causing them pain and consequence, you should be saving it. Parents should be saving everything they can. Screen captures, take a picture of the screen with your own phone. Anything you can save that's data, because that becomes useful to kind of go back and say, here's what is being said. And then that gets away from a parent said, the child said. Is like, no, here it is. Here is the factual information of what was given out and spread. And I think that's an important thing for students to think about, that there are repercussions for misuse of a telecommunication device. And now Michigan does have a cyberbullying law on the books, separate from the schools. So that is another avenue that parents can take if the school is, reluctant to do anything. Then if it really continues, that would be something for the parents may have to go to their local police department and say, we know there's a cyberbullying law. How does it apply in this effect? For me, I've always said there is no difference between two students getting in an argument over a football on the playground and bringing that argument into a classroom, and it manifests into a fight. The same thing happens in cyberspace. Cyberbullying is just bullying through a different technique and using the technology. It's a lot of the same factors. You're wanting people to gang up on somebody else. You're isolating somebody. you're causing pain and consequence. So I think those are some things that parents, if cyberbullying is happening, save everything. If the school really isn't going to do anything, especially if there's any threats, the school should act immediately, as what we've seen. It may be time to contact your local police about Michigan cyberbullying law.
You mentioned earlier that when a parent goes to the school, and asking for a copy of the anti-bullying policy and comparing that side by side with the state guidelines and with Matt's law.
Yep.
Once a parent discovers that maybe their school is really not compliant, what are their options? What's the next level? Where do they go to try? And I guess, for lack of a better term, kick the school's butt and say, listen, no, you have to do this. You have to act.
And that's another place where I think, the legislation fell down, because in the original way, that one paragraph I had written was, I wanted a dedicated person that would be hired by every school district, that or this would be part of someone's job, is to manage what was going on, manage how it was all being implemented, and they were needing to report to the board and report to the state legislature every year. I don't think anybody's been reporting what they've been doing to the state. There are times people called the state and the state told them to call me. I don't have any powers, so it becomes this, just bounce around thing, and it shouldn't. And that is the thing that really aggravates parents. And that's where, if you're having problems and you talk to other people, then that's a time also for parents. Get to your PTA, your PTO, go to your school board members. I mean, I've talked with people that are school board members and have no idea that Matt's law even exists, or they're supposed to be following it. So that's something that they need to be educated. Everybody that comes into, a school system needs to know what Matt's law is, and need to know we're all mandated reporters, when we are in a school. So every one of us, if we see something, we should be saying something. So it is very frustrating on that point, because there is no centralized place where people can, make a report. The one place where people can is, we do have in Michigan, is OK to say. So OK to say is another way for parents, grandparents, the students themselves, or student about another student, can go either online, phone call, text, email, to OK to say, make a complaint, file an issue. That does go through the state police, that goes to the school, and then that can be followed up on. The other thing in one of the revisions to the law that I wanted was, every school district must use OK to say. Because if everybody used the same program instead of their own programs, and they use their own programs because nothing gets reported out, it just stays internal, and they decide what they do with it. Is if everybody was using one concentrated program and we had all these reports coming in, we could actually use that data to see that there were certain problems in Grand Rapids, and certain problems in Wyandotte, and certain problems in Alpena that don't happen everywhere else. And we'd actually be able to use that data and say, hey, you know what? We need a team to really go talk about, drugs in this area, or a team talk about gun violence in this area. So can we get there? Sure. It's just more work that needs to be done. But that's one of the most frustrating things for parents is, they get to that point, they're stalled, waiting for, the parent to go away. And what I see is that the student is the one really being punished, because nothing's getting done, and that student still has to go through the issues every single day. So schools need to be thinking about different ways of what they can do internally, moving students from classroom to classroom. I know it's a hassle, but it would be a lot easier if teachers would just stop what they're doing during a lesson, address what's going on right there and then, and just kind of to stop it. And that's one of those things we need to retrain and move forward on.
I tell you, one of my takeaways already is and I never even thought about this, so I'm really enjoying this conversation. But something just as simple as what you were saying, Kevin, find out what the school's anti-bullying policy is. I mean, that should be as basic as starting the school year. I'm getting backpacks, pencils, pens, glue sticks, and I'm going to find out what that policy is for the school. That should be as basic and standard for every parent, every start of every school year, and to start the engagement at that level. And so, and I'm just surprised I never even thought about that myself. So I appreciate this conversation and the learning and that one I mean, I have many takeaways, but that one takeaway for sure, I'm going to be sharing with others in my family immediately. I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, I think it should be a document that's also a living document that has to change. They have to adapt it and let parents know. A lot of schools will have like a code of conduct, and it may be in there, but if you have, since you by law have to have a separate policy about bullying and harassment, that policy should be distributed. I agree, at the beginning of the school year. And it's also not a bad idea to readdress it in after spring break, or after the students come back from the holiday break. Because there's a lot of times I have been asked to come in and do presentations like in May, April, May, and I've said no, because the year's over. You're just want to do a presentation to check a box. You know, you really need to do a presentation to set the course for the year early, and then like mid-year, so they still have time to work on it and to understand why they're doing it. So I agree with you, and I would love that to be a part of. It should be in the packet. And I know that I have had parents who call me. It should also be readily available on the school's website, because I've had parents go and ask, and they're given the runaround about having one. Oh, we have to find it. And, you know, it should be, like you said, right there for everyone to see and to download.
It really begs the question, why is there not more emphasis on this? You know, at the beginning of when I start a new job, I'm given a policy and procedures. I'm given a code of conduct. I'm required to sign that I received it. I have to date it. You know, when my child starts their school year every year, I have to sign the electronics policy. They have to also sign that they're going to abide and, you know, and take care of the school's equipment. Where's the anti-bullying code of conduct? You know, why is there not as much emphasis?
Well, I think, just very honestly, I think we've become complacent that, you know, we did bullying, you know, we've talked about it, you know, it's we did that 4 years ago, you know, we don't have to do it again. But no, it has to be an ever evolving learning, relearning thing. And you're absolutely right. Is that something? So again, these are all really great questions. And what it also leads to is, you know, maybe we need to find some researcher at one of our fine universities who could start putting together a survey and send a survey out to teachers and schools about how are they implementing this? How is this getting out? You know, how are they disseminating this information? You know, what's that feedback? Because that would be really good information to take away. I mean, a lot of things on bullying, a lot of us, we're using really old information. You know, there haven't really been any big new studies on bullying that there were probably back in, you know, 2009, 2010. So there's little ones that have been done, but nothing really comprehensive that I know of.
Kevin, you mentioned that aside from people telling parents and students and teachers to call you, and we will not be sharing your personal cell phone number as much as people would like us to. You mentioned OK to Say as a great resource. What other resources can you think of that parents or students or teachers might be able to utilize when it comes to bullying? If their school doesn't have a policy, if they have questions that they can't get answered, if they need help, Where else can they look?
Yeah, I think the things that they can do is they can look to places, I mean, like Defeat the Label, you know, there are other things that are online. There are other projects that are out there that can give guidance about it. It used to be, I think we used to keep like a website, and the government website had all kinds of the Stop Bullying website, which was taken down the last, administration, because it was okay to kind of bully. So, but people need to kind of look for those resources beyond their school. They might want to look at their local colleges. They might want to look at, Boys and Girls Club. They may have peer mediation, restorative justice. So there are programs that are out there, but you're going to have to work with the school to kind of get it into a school as well.
Where can listeners find you? Social media, your personal phone number? What? No, it's just I can apparently get
No,
that
best thing is through Defeat the Label, because Jamie, you can become my agent, and you can field all those calls.
That would be an incredible honor to field all those calls for you. Pam said she has so many takeaways from this, and I feel like every time I have the honor and privilege of hearing you speak, especially in this setting, so openly and honestly, I now have this mental to-do list of all these things that, as an educator, as a parent, as somebody who's doing this work, that I need to do. Any final takeaways? Any final call to actions? Anything that you would want to say before we thank you?
I think it is, if you have a thought that something's going on with your son or daughter, ask. If they don't want to talk, maybe that's talk with their teachers. It is those things to look for that are old standbys, and you can tell if someone's being bullied if they're changing their attitude. Their clothes, maybe ripped. There might be blood on them. They may be missing things because someone's taking things from them. So there are a lot of factors. They're being more reclusive. They're not talking. They're not as talkative as they used to be. They have a new set of friends. They've gained friends. They've lost friends. Be mindful of what's going on in their world, but also as a parent, even though that technology is there and can cause a lot of pain, that's a student's lifeline today. So a lot of parents can easily say, I'm taking the phone away. And it can easily kind of cause a bigger problem. So it's out there. Be mindful of it. It is happening all the time, unfortunately. I think it's something it's all about prevention, because I don't think we're ever going to stop bullying. Sadly, it's this human nature thing. It's the power and control. I can do something to somebody else, and I'm going to do it until I get away with it. And we want students to be aware that that's not how we should kind of live our lives. And I think that's letting them know that we're here for them, letting them know that we want them to help us engage in change process is one of the benefits to doing this and working with students. And I think they come up with fantastic ideas. We just sometimes have to listen and get your community involved. You are probably not the only parent going through this. Your student is not the only student who is a target. So there's also power in numbers. You find those other parents and find out, what are they doing if they're getting the same runaround that you might be, and come together and bring that to the PTO, the PTA, bring that to a community meeting. And I think those are some steps that adults, and then in the schools, just notice it's happening and do something when it happens. Take that spark when something happens, to talk about it, to explain it, and just watch how things unfold. And we can stop and prevent a lot of the problems that we have in our schools today.
I I'm a little speechless at the moment because it's so true. And I was actually going to ask you, do you think that bullying will ever not be an issue? And I think that's the
I
pretty
think
broad.
I think it's it's just real. It's
Yeah.
being real. And I had gone to presentations and I had seen people and, well, you do this and it'll all be cleaned up in 6 months, and it's just kind of like, no, it isn't. As I said, I came into this knowing nothing. And I was so fortunate to be brought into a circle of educators and law enforcement who had already been working on this for 15 years before the height of everything. So they had so much knowledge, and I tried to soak up as much as I could. People say, and you've said, I'm an expert. No, you know what I am? I'm trying to reciprocate everything that was given to me to give to everybody else, so that it's never going to stop until we really change a mindset that it is one of the most dangerous things in our schools that is totally preventable.
I think that pretty much sums it up. It's one of the most dangerous things in our school that is totally preventable. Kevin, we cannot thank you enough for being our first guest, for joining us with this, and for really having this incredibly honest conversation. Hopefully this will serve to continue the conversation, which we're looking to do over our next, over the course of this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. People can catch you at the 2022 Community Conversation on Bullying with the Meemic Foundation Defeat the Label, taking place virtually. And for more information on that, you can check out the Defeat the Label website, the Meemic Foundation website, social media. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. Pam, Christine.
No, thank you. Just appreciate you so much.
Thank all of you, because I think what Defeat the Label has been doing has been fantastic. Meemic joining in as just given more, it's not credibility, but more power. And I think that's, we want to empower people. That's the biggest thing we walk away with. So Pam, thank you for your organization to seeing that this is an issue to put your name behind, and for all the work that Jamie and Christine and Kevin and Jeff do at Defeat the Label. It makes a difference in people's lives, and that's why we are doing what we're doing, to make a difference in someone else's life, not our own.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.